and you mentioned the relationship with Israel.
Yeah.
Netanyahu, in the heat of this battle, says, I'm not for the Palestinian state anymore, and he says a lot of other things. And then he kind of walks it back. Yeah. But the administration seems to be trying to keep the fight going.
Yeah.
Instead of sort of remaining silent, which is what I would have suggested they do after he walked it back, and just try to repair things behind the scenes, whatever. It seemed like they were trying to, get the last word for the news cycle in. What is the administration's strategy here?
Yeah, Bob, I think in a way we almost saw kind of exaggerated surprise from the White House, because I think they've doubted for a long time now that Netanyahu was sincere about a two-state solution. But I think a couple of things happened. Number one is I think that the president and people around him were viscerally appalled by what they saw Netanyahu say in the closing days of the campaign. In particular, Netanyahu was warning his supporters that Arab Israelis were coming out to vote against his opponents and saying, you have to come out because the Arabs are coming out. And I think there was a feeling in the White House he essentially played the race card. And you can imagine how that goes over in the West Wing in this White House. But I think there's also just exasperation that the peace process is not going anywhere under this guy, and that he, as one former Obama official told me, showed his true colors here, that he pays lip service to the two-state solution in their view, but he doesn't really want it. I also wonder, Bob, this is speculative, but this hard line that the White House is taking, these kind of implied threats that we may not have Israel's back at the United Nations and other international forums where people are pressuring Israel, I wonder if it's a little bit of a high inside fastball in the context of Iran, and saying, maybe you could pipe down a little bit on the Iran deal, and maybe we'll lay off a little bit on this other stuff. Because there is a point at which it's not clear to me why the White House keeps pressing this and pressing this. So what is the leverage they want here? And I wonder if it could have to do with this Iran situation.
Say on that,
that's an interesting point.
Thanks.
There's a lot of sting here. I mean, remember, Secretary of State Kerry, I was on that plane going back and forth for a good, 18 months with him trying to negotiate a peace process between Israel and Palestine in the past year. So that was blessed by the president. Now you have Bibi standing up there, basically how they interpret it as, we played you. I was never serious, and you wasted a lot of time talking to me about this two-state solution. So there's some real sort of shock at that aspect of it. But you also have, as one Arab official said to me, frustration here that those comments about coming out in droves, Arab Israelis to vote, that it may have empowered some extremism, essentially by saying, look, by us putting our cards on the guys who will come to the negotiations, the Palestinian Authority, though it's weak, almost bankrupt, may not be terribly legitimate. Now you're making people say, well, what's our alternative, and go more towards extremism.
Here, let me just play the latest word on what the president, in an interview with the Huffington Post, said about this and about whether he thought Netanyahu had flip-flopped. Here's what he said. This is the latest.
We take him at his word when he said that it wouldn't happen during his prime ministership. And so that's why we've got to evaluate what other options are available to make sure that we don't see a chaotic situation in the region.
So, Peggy, do you think the Israeli-American relationship has been harmed here, or?
I absolutely do. From the moment Prime Minister Netanyahu was invited to speak before the Congress by the Republicans of Congress without alerting and getting a sign-off by the White House, by an administration that, if you love them or don't love them, they are in charge of U.S. diplomacy, and certain niceties and traditions ought to be respected. From that moment straight through what has happened in the past week with regard to what Netanyahu said during the election and what the White House feels about it, someday history will show us a transcript of the Barack Obama-Bibi Netanyahu victory phone call in which the president called Netanyahu, and which pieces of it are starting to come out. It sounds like it was a fairly abrasive conversation, not marked by trust on both sides. I think U.S.-Israeli relations right now are in the worst shape I've ever seen them in, the worst shape they've been in since 1948, when America was instrumental in inventing Israel. I think that relationship has had ups and downs, but always has been held together by a mutuality of affection and rough shared interests. I think the poisonous relationship between these two leaders has been very damaging, and their different way of seeing the world.
So what do we do now, Michael?
Well, I agree with all that, but that does not explain the failure of the peace talks. The peace talks did not fail because of the Israeli election. They are failing because of Gaza, where Israel ceded territory to Palestinian Hamas authorities and rewarded by missiles. There is no Israeli prime minister of either party who is going to allow the West Bank to be turned into another Gaza. And that's the situation we face right now. And that's what Netanyahu was really saying when he said that right now we can't have this deal because we don't have a responsible partner. That's been the problem all along.
Well, the question is sort of which has to come first, and I think some people in the administration think you're never going to make progress in Gaza, defang Hamas, if you don't stop the settlement building and show more of an appetite for peace. I'm not saying that's clearly the right answer. This is really complicated and hard to know for sure. But it is true, Bob, at the end of the day, the fundamental relationship is still there. I mean, you know, if it came to kind of a shooting war, we would have Israel's back. We still send $3 billion a year in military assistance to Israel. The intelligence cooperation is very strong. And by the way, we rely on the Israelis for some very useful intelligence. The Mossad are very helpful to us in all kinds of ways, particularly when it comes to Iran. So I don't think we're going to see the relationship completely ruptured, but the poison at the top level, leader to leader right now, is almost unprecedented.